The sun hung low over the rolling cornfields of Maplewood, Iowa, casting a golden glow through the lace curtains of Sarah Thompson's modest farmhouse. It was September 10th, 2025, and the air carried the crisp promise of fall. Sarah stood in her kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the wrinkles from her faded blue dress. A thrift store find her husband James had picked out years ago for $10. Today was no ordinary day. It marked her 70th birthday, and more significantly, her 50th wedding anniversary. 50 years of shared laughter, tears, and quiet moments with James, the man she'd vowed to love through every season of life. She'd spent the morning baking a small vanilla cake, its sweet aroma mingling with the scent of coffee brewing on the counter. A modest celebration, she thought, but enough to honor the milestone. Sarah's gray hair, once a vibrant chestnut, was pulled into a loose bun, strands slipping free to frame her weathered face. Though dimmed by time, her hazel eyes sparkled with anticipation as she arranged two plates on the dining table set with her mother's old china. She'd planned a quiet evening with James, just the two reminiscing over old photos and maybe sharing a dance to their favorite Nat King Cole record. Their son Michael, now 48 and living in Des Moines, had promised to call. It wasn't much, but for Sarah it was everything. Her life had been one of small joys, raising Michael, tending the garden, and supporting James through his teaching career at Maplewood High. She'd never asked for more than what she had, though a quiet ache lingered for the dreams she'd left behind. The front door creaked open as she lit a single candle on the cake. James stepped inside his tall frame, stooped slightly, his once dark hair now white. At 72, he still carried the confident air of the history teacher who'd charmed her in their youth, though his eyes held a weariness she couldn't quite place. "Sarah," he said, his voice gruff as he hung his coat on the rack. "What's all this fuss?" He gestured vaguely at the table, his brow furrowing as if the sight of the cake annoyed him. Sarah's smile faltered, but she steadied herself. "It's my birthday, James. And our anniversary. 50 years today." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, as if coaxing him to remember the moment's weight. She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. "We could celebrate just you and me." James's expression didn't soften. If anything, his frown deepened, lines etching deeper into his weathered face. "Come on, Sarah, accept it," he said, his tone sharp and impatient. "At your age, what's there to celebrate? Birthday cakes are for kids, not 70-year-olds. And anniversaries, we've made it this far, haven't we? No need to make a scene." His words landed like a slap, each syllable cutting into the fragile hope she'd nurtured all day. She stood frozen, the candle's flame flickering between them, casting shadows that danced across the room like ghosts of their past. Sarah's chest tightened, a familiar pang of hurt mingling with a new, sharper pain. She'd always known James could be brusque, but this felt different, colder, more dismissive. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't you remember what this day means to us?" Her eyes searched his, seeking the man who'd once slid a simple gold band onto her finger under an oak tree by the creek, promising forever. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If you were really meant for college, Sarah, would I have been able to stop you? We've had a good life. I never complained about your lack of education. Why are things stirring up now?" His words were a non sequitur, jarring in their irrelevance to her question. College. She hadn't thought about that in years, not since 1977, when her SAT results had come back blank, crushing her dreams of studying physics. She'd buried that loss, pouring herself into being a wife and mother instead. But James's mention of it now unprompted sent a chill down her spine. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, his expression shifting, softening in a way that made Sarah's stomach lurch. "I've got to step out," he said abruptly, grabbing his coat. "Michael's meeting me at the diner." "Don't wait up." Before she could protest, he was out the door, leaving the candle to burn down a lone wax pooling on the untouched cake. Sarah stood in the silence, her heart pounding with confusion and dread. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She grabbed her shawl, her movements slow but deliberate, and followed him into the evening chill. The streets of Maplewood were quiet, the diner's neon sign glowing in the distance like a beacon. As she approached, her steps faltered. She saw James and Michael seated in a booth through the window, but they weren't alone. A woman sat with them, her silver hair styled elegantly, her posture poised despite her age. She laughed at something James said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Sarah's breath caught. She didn't need to see the woman's face to know who she was. "Emily?" Carter James's cousin from their early years who'd lived in the house next door and vanished after high school. The sight of them together, so at ease, so familial, twisted a knife in Sarah's heart. She pressed a hand to the cold glass, her reflection merging with the scene inside. This wasn't just a casual meeting. This betrayal spanned decades, unraveling the life she'd thought she knew. She wanted to scream, to storm inside and demand answers, but her body felt heavy, anchored by the weight of 70 years. Instead, she stood there, a silent witness to her heartbreak as the truth unraveled. If this story's hitting you as hard as it's hitting Sarah, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of betrayal and redemption. Your support keeps us sharing stories like hers. Hit that button and join the journey. Sarah Thompson stood outside Maplewood's only diner, the neon glow of its open sign casting a harsh light on her frail figure. The Iowa night was fabulous, the air thick with the scent of fried onions and diesel from a passing truck. Her shawl, a faded knit her mother had made, did little to ward off the chill that seeped into her bones, not from the weather, but from the scene unfolding through the diner's fogged window. Inside, her husband James sat in a red vinyl booth, his broad shoulders relaxed as he leaned toward Emily Carter, the woman Sarah had once called a friend. Their son Michael sat across from them, his laughter ringing as he tossed a fry onto his plate. The three of them looked like a warm, connected, complete family, while Sarah stood alone, an outsider in her own life, her hands pressed against the glass, trembling not just from age, but from the raw pain clawing at her chest. James, 72, his white hair catching the diner's soft light, was peeling shrimp for Emily with a tenderness Sarah had never known. His fingers, steady and deliberate, worked the shells, carefully placing each piece on Emily's plate as she smiled, her eyes crinkling warmly. Sarah remembered those hands that had once held hers under the stars, promising a future together. But now they belonged to another woman, moving with a gentleness that felt like a theft of her past. Michael, his dark hair streaked with gray, leaned back in the booth, his voice carrying through the glass. He said, "My mom's just a nagging old lady," and his tone was casual but cutting. "It drives me crazy. I am always fussing about something. I get why you stick with Emily, Dad. She's way more chill," he chuckled, popping another fry into his mouth. "I wish Emily were my real mom." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, her knees buckling slightly. She'd carried Michael for 9 months, endured sleepless nights, rocking him through fevers, and sacrificed her own dreams to raise him. And now he dismissed her with a laugh, aligning himself with the woman who'd taken her place. James's gaze softened as he looked at Emily, his voice low but clear. He said, "You've always been my wife in my heart," his hand brushing hers. Emily blushed, her silver hair catching the light as she leaned into him, her shoulder resting against his chest. They were two gray-haired people embracing with the ease of teenage lovers, their connection effortless and intimate. Sarah's throat tightened, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. The scene was almost comical in its tenderness if it hadn't hurt so much. Behind the booth's glass, they were a picture of domestic bliss, while Sarah, the legal wife and mother, stood outside like a beggar, her cheap dress fluttering in the breeze. She wanted to kick the door down, to scream until every patron in the diner turned to witness her pain. But at 70, her body was a frail shell, joints, creaking, muscles weak, her once steady stride now reliant on a cane she'd forgotten at home. Her heart ached as if a knife were twisting inside it, each beat a reminder of her diminishing strength. She thought of the years she'd spent cooking James's favorite pot roast, sewing patches onto Michael's jeans, and tending the garden while they lived without her. The diner's warmth mocked her, its glow a barrier between her and the family she'd thought was hers. Sarah's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory. Emily Carter had lived next door in 1977 when they were newlyweds. She was James's cousin, always lingering too close, her laughter too bright when he helped her with homework. Sarah had trusted them, dismissing the town's whispers as small-minded gossip. But now the truth was undeniable. Emily wasn't just a fling, she was a constant, a shadow wife who'd shared James's life for decades. And Michael, the son Sarah had raised with every ounce of her love, had chosen Emily over her, his words a betrayal as sharp as his father's. She stepped back from the window, her breath shallow, her legs unsteady. A young server inside noticed her, his brow furrowing with concern. "Ma'am, are you looking for someone?" He called through the glass, his voice muffled. Sarah lowered her head, catching her reflection in the diner's window, a haggard woman, her face etched with lines of sorrow, her dress hanging loosely on a body worn by time. She was nothing like Emily, who sat inside gracefully, her tailored coat and neat hair starkly contrasting Sarah's faded appearance. Shame crashed over her like a wave, her hands trembling as she turned away, stumbling into the darkness. Back home, Sarah sat in the living room, the uneaten cake still on the table, its candle long extinguished. The silence was deafening, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock, a wedding gift from her parents, now a reminder of a life built on lies. She needed answers, a clear explanation for the 48 years James and Emily had shared behind her back. But the weight of her age, her weakening body, and the crushing realization that her family had discarded her left her frozen. She wasn't the fiery 26-year-old who'd once dreamed of changing the world with science. She was just Sarah, the housewife who'd given everything and received nothing in return. Yet deep within, a spark of resolve flickered. She deserved the truth and would find it no matter the cost. Sarah Thompson trudged back through the darkened streets of Maplewood, Iowa, the September night, wrapping around her like a heavy shroud. The neon glow of the diner faded behind her, but the image of James peeling shrimp for Emily Carter, their laughter mingling with Michael's cruel words, burned in her mind. Her shawl, a frayed knit her mother had made decades ago, clung to her shoulders, offering little comfort against the chill that seeped into her bones. At 70, her body felt like a fragile relic, joints, creaking muscles weakened by years of labor, her steps uneven without the cane she'd left behind in her haste. The streets were quiet, save for the distant hum of a truck and the rustle of corn stalks in the breeze, but Sarah's heart pounded with a chaos that drowned out the world. She reached her farmhouse, the porch light flickering, as if mirroring her faltering spirit. Inside, the uneaten vanilla cake sat on the dining table, its single candle now a puddle of wax, a silent testament to her shattered expectations. She sank into a worn armchair, her hands trembling as they gripped the armrests. The grandfather clock ticked relentlessly each second, a reminder of the 50 years she'd spent building a life with James. She'd been 20 when they married under the oak tree by Maplewood Creek, her dreams of studying physics at a university bright and unyielding. But those dreams had crumbled in 1977 when her SAT results came back blank, leaving her with nothing but a junior high certificate and a life of domesticity. Sarah caught her reflection in the living room's dusty mirror. Her face, etched with deep lines, stared back a haggard map of sacrifice and sorrow. Her gray hair, once a rich chestnut, hung in sparse strands, and her hazel eyes, dulled by time, glistened with unshed tears. The cheap blue dress James had bought her for $10 hung loosely on her frame, its faded fabric contrasting with Emily's tailored coat and elegant posture in the diner. Emily, also in her late 60s, carried herself with a grace Sarah could never match, her silver hair styled neatly, her presence commanding respect. The server had called her Miss Emily, his tone deferential, while Sarah had been just ma'am, a pitying glance her only acknowledgement. Shame crashed over her like a wave, her hands clenching into fists as she fought the urge to cry. She'd given everything to James and Michael, years of cooking pot roasts, mending clothes, and tending the garden, while James taught history at Maplewood High. And Michael grew into a man who now despised her. She'd buried her aspirations, convincing herself that being a good wife and mother was enough. But now, standing outside that diner, she'd felt like a beggar, invisible and discarded. The contrast between her worn appearance and Emily's refinement cut deeper than James's betrayal. Society had no place for an older woman like her, no voice for her pain. At 26, she would have stormed into the diner demanding answers. At 70, she could barely stand without swaying her body, a traitor to her raging heart. Yet beneath the shame, a spark of defiance flickered. Sarah thought of the life she might have had, a physicist, perhaps working in a lab, her name in textbooks instead of on grocery lists. The memory of her SAT failure stung anew, James's odd comment earlier echoing in her mind. If you were really meant for college, would I have stopped you? What did he mean? The question gnawed at her, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She needed answers not just about Emily, but about the dreams stolen from her. Her body might be frail, her heart bruised, but she wasn't done yet. She deserved the truth and would find it even if it meant facing the family that had cast her aside. Sarah rose from the chair, her movement slow but deliberate. She lit a new candle, its flame a small beacon in the dim room. She wouldn't let this night, her 70th birthday and 50th anniversary, end in defeat. The clock ticked on, and with each second, her resolve grew. She would confront James and Michael, demand the truth about Emily, and uncover the secrets that had unraveled her life. Her age was heavy, but her spirit was not yet broken. She would fight for the answers she deserved, no matter how painful they might be. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the farmhouse windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen where Sarah sat, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. The vanilla cake, untouched, still sat on the table, a silent accusation of the previous night's betrayal. Her hazel eyes, though tired, burned with a quiet determination. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the diner scene, James's tenderness toward Emily Carter, Michael's cruel dismissal, and the gnawing suspicion that her lost dreams were tied to their secret. The front door creaked open, and James stepped inside, his face drawn, his white hair disheveled from a night spent elsewhere. Michael followed, his expression sullen, his briefcase slung over his shoulder, as if he'd come straight from his office in Des Moines. Sarah stood, her frail frame steady, despite the ache in her joints. "James," she said, her voice low but firm. "We need to talk. About last night. About Emily." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of 50 years of marriage. James froze, his eyes narrowing, while Michael rolled his eyes, dropping his briefcase onto the couch with a thud. "Mom, really?" Michael snapped, his tone dripping with irritation. "You're embarrassing yourself. What you've turned into, a detective stalking us at the diner. That's pathetic for someone your age." Sarah's chest tightened, but she held her ground, her gaze fixed on James. She said, "I saw you with her," her voice trembling but resolute. "You and Emily are acting like a family, like I don't exist. After 50 years, James, I deserve to know the truth." Her eyes flicked to Michael, who scoffed, crossing his arms. "Truth," he said. "What's the big deal? Dad and Emily have been together for 48 years. They're practically married. You're just making a scene over nothing." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 48 years. She staggered back, her hand gripping the table for support. Her heart twisted, the pain sharp and unrelenting. 48 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've been with her since we were newlyweds." James's expression remained calm, almost indifferent, as he leaned against the counter. "So you know," he said, his tone flat. "Emily and we've been together a long time. She's always been part of my life. Why make a fuss now?" Sarah's lips trembled, tears welling in her eyes. "Why? Because I'm your wife, James. I raised our son and gave up everything for you both, and you've been living a lie with her." Her voice rose, cracking with the weight of her grief. Michael cut in, his voice harsh. "Mom, stop it. Emily is a professor who has retired from Iowa State. She's educated, accomplished, Dad's real match. You're just a housewife. What do you even do besides nag?" "It isn't very comfortable to call you my mom." His words were a knife slicing through the love she'd poured into him since he was a baby. She'd risked her health to bring him into the world, given up her dreams to raise him, and now he stood before her full of pride for another woman. The room spun, memories flooding back. Sarah recalled 1977, when she and James were newlyweds, and Emily, his cousin, lived next door. Emily had struggled in school, always at the bottom of their class at Maplewood High. On the other hand, Sarah had excelled, her sights set on the SAT and a physics degree. However, her scores were missing when the results came out, and Emily had mysteriously left for a top university. James had been evasive, claiming Emily had moved to live with relatives in Chicago. Now the pieces clicked into place. Sarah's breath quickened, her voice barely a whisper. "James, did you do something to my SAT scores? Did you give them to Emily?" James's calm facade flickered, a flash of unease crossing his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it, but Michael spoke first, his tone smug. "So what if he did? Emily deserved it. She's a scholar, Mom. You'd have wasted it. You're better off cooking and cleaning." Sarah's knees buckled, her hand clutching her chest as the truth sank in. James swapped her SAT scores with Emily's, stealing her chance at college, her dreams, and her future. She remembered the nights she'd cried in secret, mourning the life she'd never had, while James and Emily built theirs on her loss. "You destroyed me," Sarah said, her voice rising raw with pain. "You took my future, James. Why? What gave you the right?" She stepped toward him, her frail hands trembling with fury. James pulled away, his impatience breaking through. "So what, Sarah? I switched your scores. It's been decades. I never complained about your lack of education. Why make a scene now?" His words echoed his dismissal from the previous night, each a fresh wound. Engrossed in his phone, Michael muttered, "Seriously, Mom, enough. What would you have done with a degree, anyway?" "Make me some coffee." Sarah's vision blurred, hatred and grief intertwining. She saw them clearly now, James, the unfaithful husband who'd betrayed her for 48 years, and Michael the ungrateful son who'd chosen Emily over her. The sorrow surged, threatening to drown her, but beneath it a memory surfaced, Emily's voice years ago saying to James, "You promised me a future. Don't let her ruin it." Emily hadn't just benefited from the score swap she'd known, perhaps even pushed for it. The realization fueled Sarah's anger, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let them break her. Not anymore. Sarah Thompson stood in her kitchen, the morning light filtering through the lace curtains of her Maplewood, Iowa farmhouse. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the untouched vanilla cake from her 70th birthday, now a crumbling symbol of her shattered 50th wedding anniversary. Her hands, weathered and trembling, gripped the table's edge as she stared at the spot James had stood just hours ago, admitting he'd swapped her SAT scores with Emily Carter's in 1977. His words echoed in her mind. "So what, Sarah? I switched your scores. It's been decades." Michael's cruel dismissal. "You're just a housewife." Emily's a professor, cut even deeper, a betrayal from the son she'd raised with every ounce of her love. But the memory of Emily, poised and elegant in the diner, fueled a new fire in Sarah's heart. Emily wasn't just a passive beneficiary of James's deception, she was complicit, and Sarah was beginning to see the full scope of her role. Her thoughts drifted back to 1977, when she and James were newlyweds, living in a modest clapboard house on the edge of Maplewood. Emily Carter, introduced as James's distant cousin, had moved into the rental next door, and her presence was a constant hum in their early marriage. She was a lanky girl with sharp eyes and a lazy approach to school, always trailing at the bottom of their class at Maplewood High. Sarah, by contrast, had been a star student, her mind alight with dreams of studying physics, her SAT prep books dog-eared and filled with notes. Emily would linger in their kitchen, her laughter too bright, as James tutored her, his patience endless in a way it never was with Sarah. The town whispered about their closeness, but young and trusting, Sarah had dismissed it as gossip. Now those memories took on a sinister hue. One moment stood out sharp as a blade. It was late summer 1977, a humid evening with cicadas buzzing outside. Sarah had returned early from a library shift, her arms full of books, and overheard Emily's voice through the open window of their house. "You promised me a future, James," Emily had said, her tone low and urgent. "I can't stay stuck in this town like her. Don't let Sarah ruin it. Get me those scores." James's reply was muffled, but his soothing tone was unmistakable, contrasting with the curt way he spoke to Sarah about her studies. At the time, Sarah had brushed it off, assuming Emily was begging for extra tutoring. But now the truth was undeniable. Emily knew about the plan to steal Sarah's SAT scores, perhaps even orchestrated it to secure her path to a top university. Sarah's breath quickened, her heart pounding as she pieced together more fragments. After the SAT results, with Sarah's name mysteriously absent, Emily had vanished from Maplewood, supposedly to live with relatives in Chicago. James had been evasive, shrugging off Sarah's tears with a vague, "You'll find your way." Meanwhile, their savings money Sarah's parents had left for her education had dwindled, attributed to household expenses. Sarah now suspected those funds had bribed an exam official to swap her scores with Emily's. Emily hadn't just benefited from Sarah's loss. She'd actively pushed James to betray his wife, her ambition outweighing any loyalty to the woman who'd welcomed her as family. The realization burned, mingling with the pain of Michael's words and James's indifference. Sarah sank into a chair, her frail body trembling with rage and grief. At 70, she felt the weight of her sacrifices, decades spent as a housewife, cooking James's favorite pot roasts, sewing Michael's clothes, and tending the garden, while her dreams of a physics degree faded. Emily, now a retired professor from Iowa State, had built a life of prestige on Sarah's stolen future, and James had enabled it, choosing Emily's ambition over Sarah's potential. Sarah's hands clenched, her nails digging into her palms. She thought of confronting Emily, imagining her poised facade crumbling under the weight of the truth. But what could she do now? Her body was weak, her energy sapped by age, her voice silenced by a society that dismissed older women. Yet a spark of defiance flickered within her. She remembered the girl she'd been, bright, determined, unafraid. That girl deserved justice, and Sarah, even at 70, wasn't ready to let her go. She stood slow but resolute and walked to the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman worn by time, but her eyes burned with a fire she hadn't felt in decades. Emily's complicity, James's betrayal, Michael's ingratitude, they would not define her. She would find a way to reclaim what was stolen, even if it meant tearing apart the life they'd built on her pain. Sarah Thompson's kitchen felt like a tomb. the silence broken only by the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock, a wedding gift from her parents that now mocked her 50 years of marriage. The morning light had faded to a gray afternoon, the untouched vanilla cake on the table, a bitter reminder of her 70th birthday, and the betrayal unveiled the night before. James's admission that he'd swapped her SAT scores with Emily Carter's in 1977 echoed in her mind, each word a fresh wound. Michael's scorn, calling her an embarrassing housewife while praising Emily as a professor, twisted the knife deeper. And Emily's complicity, her long-ago plea to James, "Don't let Sarah ruin it," revealed a calculated betrayal that spanned decades. Sarah's frail hands trembled as she gripped the counter, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might give out. She wanted to scream, to confront James and Michael again, to demand why they'd stolen her dreams. But her body betrayed her, her legs wobbled, her breath came in shallow gasps, and a sharp pain radiated through her chest. She stumbled to the living room, collapsing onto the worn armchair, her vision blurring with tears. "Why, James?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What gave you the right to destroy me?" The question hung unanswered, drowned by memories of the life she might have had, a physicist, a scholar, a woman who shaped the world instead of scrubbing its floors. The pain surged, a knife twisting in her heart, and she clutched her chest, gasping for air. As darkness crept into her vision, a strange warmth enveloped her. A soft light pulsed around her like starlight filtering through the Iowa night sky. A gentle yet commanding voice whispered, "Your justice awaits, Sarah. Please take it." The words were not human, not of this world, but they carried a weight that steadied her faltering heart. Was it fate, divine mercy? A second chance granted by some cosmic force? She didn't know, but the light grew brighter, wrapping her in its embrace until the pain faded, replaced by a sense of weightlessness. Her eyes fluttered shut, and the world dissolved into a radiant void. When her eyes opened, Sarah was no longer in her 70-year-old body. She sat at an old wooden desk, its surface scarred and littered with textbooks, the air thick with the scent of chalk and cedar. Now smooth and firm, her hands rested on a worn copy of Physics for Beginners. She gasped, touching her face. Her skin was soft, her hair a vibrant chestnut pulled into a tight ponytail. She was 26 again, her body alive with the vigor of youth. The room was familiar, the gray clapboard walls of her 1977 Maplewood home, the faded red quilt on the bed, the wooden chair where James used to sit. A yellowed calendar hung on the wall, its date frozen at May 20th, 1977, 6 months before the SAT that would change her life. Sarah's heart raced, a wild mix of disbelief and exhilaration. She stood, her legs steady, her movements fluid, as if time had unwound itself just for her. She ran to the mirror, her reflection confirming the impossible. Her young face, bright hazel eyes, and determined jaw stared back, unmarred by decades of sorrow. Tears welled, but they were not of grief. They were of hope, of a second chance. "Heaven's mercy," she whispered, her voice strong and clear. Whether divine intervention or a cosmic fluke, she'd been reborn at the precise moment before her fate was stolen. The SAT was coming, and this time she knew James's plan to give her scores to Emily. She wouldn't let it happen again. The front door creaked, and James stepped inside, young and smug, his dark hair falling over his forehead. "Sarah, you're sleeping on those books again," he sneered, tossing his jacket onto the couch. "You think you're college material? Drop out already and save us the trouble." His words, so familiar from her past life, stung, but now they fueled her resolve. She remembered how his constant criticism had worn her down, making her doubt her worth, while he secretly plotted with Emily. This time she saw his charm, manipulation, and betrayal through him. Sarah forced a smile, her mind racing with strategy. "You're right, James," she said, her voice sweet but laced with steel. "I may not be cut out for this. I'll quit tomorrow, stay home, and be a good wife." James froze, his eyes narrowing, clearly unsettled by her sudden compliance. In her past life, she'd studied tirelessly, terrified of his threats, while he'd funneled her efforts to Emily. Now she'd play his game, but on her terms. The spark in her eyes burned brighter, a promise of justice. She was reborn, and this time she would rewrite her story. The morning sun filtered through the faded lace curtains of Sarah Thompson's clapboard house in Maplewood, Iowa, casting a soft glow across the wooden desk where her SAT prep books lay open. It was May 21st, 1977, and the air held the fresh scent of spring grass, a stark contrast to the stifling grief of her 70-year-old self just days ago, or instead, decades in the future. Reborn at 26, her body vibrant and her hazel eyes sharp with purpose. Sarah sat at the desk, her chestnut hair tied back, pretending to study, while her mind churned with strategy. She'd awakened in this moment 6 months before the SAT. Armed with the knowledge of James's betrayal, he'd stolen her scores in her past life to secure a university spot for Emily Carter, his mistress. Now she would turn his deception against him. James stood in the doorway, his dark hair mussed, his teacher's jacket slung over his shoulder. At 28, he carried the smug confidence of a man who thought he controlled everything: his classroom at Maplewood High, his marriage, and Sarah's future. "Sarah, you sleeping on those books again?" he sneered, his voice dripping with the familiar disdain she'd endured in her past life. "You think you're college material. Just drop out already. Be a proper wife and save us the trouble." In her previous life, his words had crushed her, driving her to study harder and prove herself, only for him to funnel her efforts to Emily. Now they were a gift, a confirmation of his plan, and her chance to unravel it. Sarah closed her physics book with a deliberate sigh, turning to face him with a sweet, almost naive smile. "You're right, James," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Studying's exhausting. I'm not cut out for this. I'll quit school tomorrow, stay home, cook clean, and tend the chickens. Be the perfect housewife you want." Her words were a calculated trap designed to throw him off balance. She knew he needed her to take the SAT to produce the high scores he'd swap for Emily's. Without her effort, his plan would collapse. James froze, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What he said, his tone sharp. "You're serious. You've been killing yourself over those books, and now you're just quitting." He stepped closer, his voice lowering as if coaxing a child. "Sarah, you don't mean that. You've always wanted to go to college, haven't you? Your parents would have wanted it." The mention of her parents, who'd saved for her education before their deaths, sent a jolt of anger through her, but she kept her expression neutral, her lips curving into a pout. She said, "I thought you said I wasn't good enough," and innocently tilted her head. "You're always telling me I'm wasting time spending money we don't have. I'm married now, James. What's the point of school? I'll stay home and support you like a good wife should." She watched with quiet delight as his face darkened, his jaw tightening. In her past life, his constant criticism, calling her lazy, threatening to make her drop out, had pushed her to near collapse, her health fraying as she studied through sleepless nights. He'd been slipping next door to tutor Emily, their affair hidden behind his feigned concern. Now she saw his game clearly, and her feigned surrender was the first move in her counterattack. James took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "Sarah, listen," he said, his tone shifting to a forced gentleness. "I heard a rumor at school. The SAT might be a big deal this year. New policies, maybe a chance for you to get into a good college. You don't want to throw that away, do you? For your parents' sake." His hypocrisy was almost laughable, invoking her parents' memory to keep her in the game he planned to rig. Sarah's nails dug into her palms, but she kept her smile in place, her eyes wide with mock sincerity. "Maybe," she said, shrugging, "but it's so hard, James. I can't focus without something sweet to keep me going. Could you get me some peach cobbler from the co-op, the good kind with the buttery crust?" His expression faltered, a mix of frustration and disbelief. Peach cobbler required ration coupons, a luxury in their tight budget, but Sarah knew he couldn't refuse without risking her quitting. She leaned back, her heart racing with the thrill of control. This was only the beginning. She'd make him pay one calculated step at a time, while protecting the future she'd been reborn to reclaim. The days following Sarah Thompson's feigned surrender passed in a blur of calculated chaos in her Maplewood home. The Iowa summer of 1977 was heating up the air, thick with humidity and the buzz of cicadas outside her clapboard house. At 26, reborn with the knowledge of James's betrayal, Sarah moved through her days with a quiet intensity, her hazel eyes sharp as she dismantled her husband's carefully laid plans. She'd learned in her past life that James had swapped her SAT scores with Emily Carter's, stealing her chance at a physics degree to secure Emily's future as a professor. Now she played the role of the obedient wife, all while orchestrating a subtle revenge that would leave James and Emily reeling. Sarah lounged at the kitchen table, her SAT books closed, a glass of lemonade in hand. Once spotless from her tireless efforts, the house was now a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry untouched, the chickens clucking hungrily in the yard. She'd juggled school and housework in her past life, packing James's lunches and scrubbing floors to prove her worth. This time she did nothing, her studying a pretense to justify her inaction. Returning from Maplewood High, James slammed the door, his face haggard. "Sarah, what's going on?" he snapped, eyeing the chaos. "You haven't cleaned in days. The chickens are starving. You're supposed to be studying, not sitting around." Sarah tilted her head, her voice sugary sweet. "Oh, James, I'm trying so hard to focus, but I can't think straight without something hearty. Maybe some bacon from the co-op, and a new pillowcase, something soft, embroidered to help me sleep. Studying's making me so tired." She sighed, dramatically, pressing a hand to her forehead. James's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with frustration. Bacon and embroidered linens were luxuries requiring him to trade precious ration coupons or barter with neighbors. Sarah had been frugal in her past life, saving every penny, only to discover later that it had funded James's bribes for Emily's scores. Now she'd spend his money freely, knowing it would strain his resources and secret plans. James muttered under his breath, grabbing his jacket. "Fine, I'll get your damn bacon. But you'd better study, Sarah." He stormed out, and Sarah smirked, her heart pounding with satisfaction. She knew he'd head next door to Emily's rental, unable to resist venting to his mistress. Slipping through the back courtyard, Sarah crouched by Emily's half-open window, its warped frame a perfect eavesdropping spot. Sure enough, James burst into Emily's living room with a bundle of bacon and a pillowcase. Emily, her sharp eyes glinting, wrapped an arm around his. "You look awful, James," she said, her voice soft but edged with concern. "What's wrong?" James growled that the woman had lost her mind, tossing the bacon onto Emily's table. "Sarah's acting like a spoiled kid, demanding bacon cobbler and fancy linens. She says she's too tired to study, wants to quit school, and wants to play housewife. I spent 3 meat coupons on this nonsense. She's got the appetite of a pig." Emily's face tightened, her fingers digging into his arm. "You said you'd handle her, James," she snapped. "I need those SAT scores. You promised me a way out of this town. If she quits, what happens to me?" Her voice betrayed her desperation, confirming Sarah's suspicions. Emily wasn't just complicit, she was the driving force pushing James to betray his wife for her ambition. Sarah's blood boiled, but she stayed silent, her crouch steady despite the ache in her knees. James pulled Emily close, his tone softening. "Don't worry, darling. Sarah has no ambition or self-respect. She'll take the test and we'll use her scores for you. She doesn't deserve them." Emily nodded, her expression calculating. "Just make sure she doesn't suspect anything. I've worked too hard for this, James. I won't be stuck here like her." Their shamelessness was staggering, but Sarah felt no anger, only clarity. She'd used their arrogance against them, draining James's resources and sowing discord between them. Back home, Sarah escalated her demands. She needed malted milk to concentrate, claiming it sharpened her mind. When James brought it, she ate slowly, deliberately in the courtyard, loud enough for Emily to hear through her open window. "This is divine, James," she called, her voice carrying. Emily's curtain twitched, her face pale with envy. Sarah's demands grew: hand cream for her dry hands, canned peaches for her mood. Each request chipped away at James's savings, his face growing more drawn with every trip to the co-op. He took over the housework, cooking and feeding the chickens, his weight dropping as the weeks passed. Sarah, meanwhile, glowed with health, her face radiant with the satisfaction of control. The tension between James and Emily mounted. Sarah overheard their arguments, Emily's voice sharp. "You're spending everything on her." "What about me?" James's excuses grew weaker, his exhaustion palpable. Sarah's heart sang with each crack in their alliance. She was no longer the naive girl who'd trusted them. Reborn, she was a force, turning the tables one demand at a time, her eyes fixed on the SAT and the justice she'd claim. In a humid haze, the summer heat of 1977 draped Maplewood, Iowa, the cicadas droned, filling the air as Sarah Thompson sat on her porch, her SAT prep books spread across a wicker table. At 26, reborn, with the knowledge of her future betrayal, Sarah's hazel eyes gleamed with purpose, her chestnut hair tied back as she plotted her next move. She'd already begun unraveling James's plan to steal her SAT scores for Emily Carter, his mistress, by feigning compliance and draining his resources with demands for luxuries like bacon and peach cobbler. But as she sipped lemonade, her mind turned to a larger suspicion: James's betrayal wasn't an isolated act. The whispers of other students' lost dreams at Maplewood High suggested a broader conspiracy that reached beyond her own stolen future. In her past life, Sarah had buried her grief over her missing SAT scores, accepting a life as a housewife, while Emily rose to a professorship at Iowa State. But she'd also heard stories of other promising students whose futures had inexplicably faltered. Mary Tate, 3 years younger, had been a fierce competitor, consistently ranking just behind Sarah in physics and math. Yet after the 1977 SAT, Mary's results were dismal, and she married a local farmer, never leaving Maplewood. Greg Young, a diligent student from a low-income family, had studied relentlessly, supported by a teacher who'd promised to fund his college fees. But Greg's scores were shockingly low, and his parents mysteriously came into money, buying a new tractor soon after. Then there were Shaolin, the butcher's daughter, and Sam Walsh, the son of Widow Walsh, both top students from struggling families whose SAT results had inexplicably tanked. Sarah's fingers tightened around her glass, her mind racing. In her past life, she'd assumed these failures were bad luck or lack of effort. Knowing James had bribed an exam official to swap her scores with Emily's, she suspected a larger scheme. James, a history teacher at Maplewood High, didn't orchestrate widespread fraud alone. Someone with more power, like Robert Hayes, the school principal, had to be involved. Robert, a portly man with a penchant for control, had access to student records and connections at the county education board. Sarah recalled his smug demeanor at school assemblies and cryptic comments about opportunities for those who know the right people. It fit too well to be a coincidence. To confirm her suspicions, Sarah began discreetly investigating. She lingered after classes, chatting with teachers under the guise of seeking study tips, her ears tuned for hints of corruption. At the town's co-op store, she overheard farmers grumbling about Robert's side deals, though no one dared name specifics. One evening, she slipped into the school's records room using a spare key she'd borrowed from James's desk. The files were messy, but she found irregularities, discrepancies in SAT registration forms, with some students' names marked in Robert's handwriting. Mary Tate's file noted a processing error, and Greg Young's had a suspicious amendment to his test center assignment. Sarah's heart pounded. This was bigger than she'd imagined. She needed proof, something undeniable to bring Robert and James down. Her plan took shape. She'd plant a recorder in Robert's office, where James often met him after hours. The device, a clunky cassette recorder borrowed from a friend, was small enough to hide under a stack of papers. Sarah waited for the perfect moment, asking James to fetch her a jar of canned peaches from the co-op, knowing he'd detour to Robert's office to vent about her demands. As he left, she slipped into the school, her pulse racing as she tucked the recorder behind a dusty ledger. She'd retrieve it later, hoping it would capture the truth. Back home, Sarah maintained her facade, studying while neglecting housework, her demands escalating to keep James off balance. She overheard him muttering to himself, "She's bleeding me dry. Once Emily gets those scores, Sarah's done." His words only sharpened her resolve. She thought of Mary, Greg, Xiao, and Sam's students whose dreams had been stolen just like hers. This wasn't just about her justice anymore, it was about theirs too. As the SAT date loomed, Sarah's plan solidified. She'd expose the conspiracy, protect her scores, and ensure every deserving student got their chance. The summer heat pressed down, but Sarah felt a fire within her reborn spirit, ready to burn away the lies. August 1977 brought a restless energy to Maplewood, Iowa, as the National Symposium on Education confirmed the SAT's return, sparking excitement across the town. Reborn at 26. Sarah Thompson sat under the sprawling oak tree by the town square, her SAT books a prop as she watched the community buzz with anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass, and anticipation, the SAT just weeks away. Sarah's plan to expose James and Principal Robert Hayes' score-swapping scheme was nearing its climax. She'd planted a recorder in Robert's office, capturing their conversations, and now she waited for the perfect moment to unveil their crimes. Her hazel eyes gleamed with determination, her chestnut hair catching the sunlight as she calculated her next move. James had grown visibly worn, his face gaunt from juggling housework, and Sarah's relentless demands for luxuries, canned peaches, malted milk, embroidered linens. Emily Carter, his mistress, was no better. Her jealousy flared as Sarah flaunted her gifts in the courtyard, knowing Emily watched from next door. Sarah had overheard their arguments, Emily snapping, "You're spending everything on her," while James promised, "Wait until the scores come through." But Sarah was a step ahead, her recorder holding the evidence that would shatter their plans. The moment came on a humid afternoon as villagers gathered under the oak tree to escape the heat. The town's loudspeaker, perched on a pole by the square, crackled to life, typically reserved for announcements about crop prices or school events. Sarah had slipped into the school that morning, retrieving her recorder and passing the tape to a trusted friend, Tom, the town's electrician, who'd agreed to fix the loudspeaker. As the crowd chatted, the speaker blared not static, but with a crystal clear conversation. "We decided on splitting it 50-50, James's voice boomed. "Now you're trying to pocket it all?" Robert's reply was sharp. "You've got nerve selling your wife's SAT scores to Emily. I rigged half the town's scores, Mary Tate, Greg Young, Xiao Lin. What did you do but betray Sarah?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, faces turning toward the loudspeaker in shock. Sarah sat calmly, her heart racing, but her expression neutral, as if hearing it for the first time. The tape continued, Robert sneering. "You think you're clean? You sold Sarah's future to your mistress," James retorted. "At least I kept it in the family. You preyed on the powerless. Sam Walsh's score gone, and his mother doesn't even know." The revelations poured out each word, a thunderclap exposing years of corruption. Mary Tate's mother, Ellen, stood nearby, her face paling as she clutched her basket. "My Mary," she whispered, then shouted, "That's why she never went to college." She surged toward the school, fury in her eyes, as others held her back. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping in outrage. "Call the cops!" someone yelled. Tom, stationed by the loudspeaker, gave Sarah a subtle nod before sprinting to the police station. James emerged from the school unaware of the broadcast, his face lost in thought. But as he stepped into the square, he froze, the weight of 100 accusing eyes pinning him in place. Greg Young, now 20 and working as a farmhand, approached, his voice soft but raw. "Mr. Thompson, you said I had a shot at college." "Was that a lie?" James stammered. "Greg, your grades were good, you'll—" But Greg's tears cut him off, his head shaking in betrayal. Sarah watched from the oak tree, her heart pounding with triumph and sorrow. The police arrived, their sirens cutting through the chaos. "James Thompson, Robert Hayes, you're under arrest," an officer declared, cuffing James as Robert was led out in handcuffs, his face ashen. The crowd parted, whispers following them like a storm. Sarah stood, her books tucked under her arm, and walked home, her steps light. She'd exposed the truth for herself and Mary, Greg, Xiao Sam, and others whose dreams had been stolen. The SAT was days away, and her scores would be hers alone this time. The curtains remained as she passed Emily's house, but Sarah knew the fallout would reach her soon. Justice was coming, and she was its architect. October 1977 swept into Maplewood, Iowa with a crisp chill, the cornfields golden under a sky heavy with the promise of snow. Reborn at 26. Sarah Thompson stood outside the Maplewood High Gymnasium, the SAT center. Her chestnut hair tied back, her hazel eyes alight with determination. The chaos of the past months, James's betrayal, Emily Carter's complicity, and the exposure of Principal Robert Hayes' score-swapping scheme had led to this moment. The loudspeaker broadcast of James and Robert's confession had rocked the town, leading to their arrests and a national outcry over exam fraud. Wary of further tampering, the authorities issued new SAT forms ensuring a clean slate. Sarah clutched her pencils, her heart steady despite the weight of her past life's loss. This time her scores would be hers alone. Inside the gymnasium, the air was thick with nervous energy, students hunched over desks, pencils scratching against answer sheets. Sarah moved through the questions with a clarity she hadn't known in her past life. Her reborn mind carried fragments of future knowledge, scientific concepts, mathematical shortcuts, and test strategies honed by decades of quiet study in her old life, when she'd read physics books in secret to soothe her broken dreams. She breezed through physics problems, her answers precise, her confidence unshaken by the doubts James had once planted. A smile tugged at her lips as she filled in the final bubble. She'd reclaimed her chance and excelled, her performance a testament to the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming. Outside, the first snowflakes, 1977, drifted down, blanketing Maplewood in a silvery hush. Sarah stepped into the cold, her breath visible, feeling as if she walked on a carpet of starlight. "I found my strength," she whispered, her voice steady. The snow seemed to cleanse the world of past injustices, each flake a promise of a new beginning. She thought of the other victims, Mary Tate, Greg Young, Xiao Lin, Sam Walsh, whose stolen scores had been exposed by her recorder. The authorities had offered them a chance to retake the SAT, and Sarah had heard whispers of their success. Mary had scored high enough for a scholarship to Iowa State. Greg was headed to the University of Iowa, Xiao planned to study biology, and Sam aimed for engineering. Their dreams, like hers, were no longer buried. Sarah's journey didn't end with the SAT. She enrolled at the University of Iowa, and her parents' savings, untouched this time by James's bribes, covered her tuition. She threw herself into physics, her passion reigniting as she tackled quantum mechanics and thermodynamics. The late nights in the library, the thrill of solving complex equations, felt like reclaiming pieces of her soul. By 1982, she earned her bachelor's degree with honors, and her professors praised her innovative approach. She pursued a PhD, her research in renewable energy, drawing on future insights she'd gleaned in her past life, ideas about solar efficiency and wind turbine design ahead of her time. Her dissertation, published in a leading journal, earned her a faculty position at a top university, where she became a trailblazer in sustainable technology. Years later, in 1990, Sarah stood in her lab, her name now Professor Sarah Thompson, etched on textbooks and cited in global conferences. Her work pushed renewable energy to the forefront, and her innovations powered homes across Iowa and beyond. She mentored students, their eager faces a reminder of the dreams she'd fought for. Reflecting on her path, she felt a quiet pride not just in her achievements, but in the resilience that had carried her through. She'd rewritten her story not out of vengeance, but to honor the girl who'd been silenced. The snow of 1977 had marked a turning point, and Sarah had walked forward, her steps pure and full of promise. In 2000, the streets of Iowa City buzzed with life, the university campus vibrant with students and the hum of progress. Sarah Thompson, now 49, stood at a crosswalk, her lab coat folded over her arm, her chestnut hair streaked with silver, but still pulled into a neat ponytail. As a renowned physics professor, her name was synonymous with renewable energy breakthroughs, and her lectures were packed with students who called her the pride of Iowa. She led a group of graduate students toward a local hot pot restaurant, their laughter echoing as they debated quantum theory and planned to order pork tripe and chicken broth. Sarah's heart was light, her life a tapestry of purpose and independence, unburdened by the past she'd rewritten. As they waited at the crosswalk, Sarah's gaze caught on a disheveled couple across the street, their scrawny, dark-skinned son throwing a tantrum on the sidewalk. The boy, about 12, rolled on the ground, crying for a toy car in a shop window. The man, his face haggard and partially hidden by a worn cap, ignored him, while the woman, her silver hair unkempt, scolded sharply. "You little brat," she snapped, grabbing a stick. "A $15 toy. Are you out of your mind? You know our situation." The boy sobbed. "You're not my mom. You're supposed to be a professor, Emily. You're supposed to get me a job." The name hit Sarah like a jolt. Emily Carter, her elegance faded, her poise replaced by desperation. The woman, Emily, lost control, striking the boy's backside. "Say that again." "A son doesn't mock his mother's looks." "What sin did I commit, marrying a useless man and raising a beast like you?" Her voice cracked, drawing stares from passers-by. Sarah's students whispered, their eyes wide, but Sarah remained still, her expression calm. She recognized the man now. James, his once confident frame stooped, his face etched with defeat. Their son, likely Michael, locked eyes with her, his bruised face lighting up with recognition. He scrambled to his feet, sprinting toward her, arms flailing. "Mom," he shouted. "It's me, Michael. I'm sorry, I was wrong. You're my real mom. Please take me away. She's crazy." Sarah's students formed a protective barrier, one snorting, "Kid, you've got the wrong person. Professor Thompson's not married, no kids. She's Iowa's pride, don't just claim relations." Another muttered, "He's out of control." Emily rushed over, yanking Michael by the collar, muttering apologies as she dragged him away, his sobs fading. James lingered, his eyes meeting Sarah's, a mix of confusion and shame flickering across his face. He mumbled something, perhaps her name, but Sarah didn't care to hear it. The light turned green, the crosswalk opening before her like a clear path to her future. She turned away, leading her students toward the restaurant, their chatter a warm contrast to the cold scene behind her. James and Emily's downfall was stark after their arrests in 1977. They'd served prison terms, James for 12 years, Emily for 5 as an accomplice. Their reputations were ruined, they'd scraped by in poverty, and their son was caught in their bitterness. Sarah felt no pity. She'd once loved James, raised a son she thought was hers, but they'd chosen Emily over her, built their lives on her stolen dreams. Now she was free, her heart at peace with the life she'd built. Reflecting as she walked, Sarah realized her journey wasn't just about reclaiming her SAT scores or punishing her betrayers. It was about rediscovering her worth, forging a path where her voice mattered. She'd mentored students like Mary Tate, now a chemist, and Greg Young, an architect, ensuring their dreams thrived too. Her lab was her sanctuary, and her work was a legacy that lit up the world. As she stepped into the restaurant, her students' cheers filling the air, Sarah smiled, her heart unburdened. The past was gone. She was whole, walking a path illuminated by her strength.